First, the discussion was about why do we need it, and these pastors, they have a ground level view. They have people coming into their churches and asking for help, and sometimes they can give them vouchers for motels. Sometimes they make calls on their behalf, but it's hard for them to not be able to help. And then also it's hard for, we had Shelley Smith from Our Neighbor's Place, who's spoken here, come and speak with us and talk about her problems with adequacy of the tools that she's got to work with. And so that was one of the first questions was, what if we did this project? Would that help you? Because the main thing is not to get in the way of the good that's already being done. And she said, yes, it offers me another tool. So we talked about how domestic abuse, they have a shelter for those people, and they have shelters for families. That would be Grace Place, I guess. That's is that in New Richmond? But there aren't a lot of places especially for single men. And we thought that this tiny home project would especially benefit single men. And so the next thing that was done was a field trip to Chippewa Falls, because Chippewa Falls has sort of done an amazing job of putting together a tiny homes project that has advanced to the point now where they're thinking they will move on from tiny homes and have different housing. So our project is following very closely in that pattern. The ministerium is on the verge of starting construction on 2 tiny homes, and they will be on wheels. Oh, I should first say, after the Hope Village, then we had one of the planners from the city come in to run the idea by him to bring back to the other people at the city, and got approval there. And then also the police department, I think Sergeant Anderson came and heard the plans and was also on board with that. So we decided we needed to do a community summit and share the plan with the whole community. So we did that at the end of January, and I think I might have. Okay, so we had to come up with a name, and the working title is Wellspring Village. And I'm not going to read through this whole thing. You don't have to either. But this is kind of what the summit was about, to tell us what we're looking at. We want to have a place for people to transition from homelessness to being housed. And the way to do that, as they spoke in the video, is to not just stick them in a housing. These tiny homes, you have to really want to change, and you're tired of being homeless. You want to change your life. Well, that makes you an ideal candidate for one of these tiny homes. You would come, if you're approved, you sign a contract that will give you 7 days in that tiny home. And in that 7 days, you will every day have contact with a mentor. And our community is going to have to train mentors to match up with the people in these homes. And then once a week you meet with a coach, because you're trying to achieve goals like employment or education, healthcare. And then at the end of the 7 days, you can sign another contract. And every 7 days, your contract is only 7 days long. So people have to stay motivated. The Hope Village, Hope Village, apparently in 10 years, they've only had 2 calls to the police department. Having them on wheels, even though it's not anticipated they're going to be traveled all over the place, loosens up some of the zoning requirements. So that is an important part of it. And yeah, that lower one, the needed services, the access to showers, etc. It was looking for a while. I would say Luther Memorial is the most motivated of the churches, or at least their pastor is the most motivated. And he saw a house come up for sale next to their church, and he was anticipating putting a tiny home on their grounds, and then having this house be like a community center for people that are living in the tiny homes. And even in his marital counseling role, encountered a couple that were really interested in being the counselors for such a place and had the background to qualify them for that. But that sale of that house ended up going for quite a bit of money. Now they're looking at another one in conjunction with, they're getting some help with Father Jerry Harris from the Catholic Church. And so it's hoped that the people in the tiny homes will have a place nearby that will provide all the showers, laundry, that kind of thing. So the expectations are the contract and a stable living plan. And then there's a program the extension offers called Rent Smart, and it teaches people what their rights are as renters and what their responsibilities are as renters. And so what Hope Village does is require that guests take this course, and we would too. They have the daily check-ins with the mentor, the weekly check-ins with the coach. Yeah, a lot of volunteers. This is going to require a lot of volunteers, a lot of fundraising, a lot of, people to turn over when someone has moved out. The place is going to have to be cleaned and restocked. There's just a lot to do, but I think River Falls would be up for it. We had a lot of enthusiasm at that community summit. And our neighbor's place, they're expanding. They're going to knock down their current location and build a new building there. And they see this as an extension, a tool that will help them in their work. Also, the University River Falls Social Work Department. This can be an excellent way for students there to gain experience. I don't know what sleep in heavenly peace means. Oh, how nice. Yeah, that would really be helpful. Anderson Windows is apparently going to be supplying windows and doors for these units. Yeah. So there are a lot of things to do. And I'm not able to be on the ministerium anymore, at least for a few months. So if anybody else here wants to be a representative, let me know. I have a job that'll go, at least I won't be able to go to the May and June meetings. Maybe I'm hoping that July I'll be able to again. But according to the minutes of the March meeting, Anderson is donating the windows and doors. They are trying to establish 501c3 status, and they're going to make one tiny home, learn from that process, adjust the design, and make two or more after that. And the projected cost for each tiny home, even with the donated windows and doors, will be $15,000 to $20,000. So Luther Memorial and First Congregational are already holding funds for building these homes. And the Hope Lutheran pastor is convening a group of volunteers who are interested in grant writing. So things are happening. Things are going to happen. But they could happen faster. And so my friend Dana is here, Dana Linscott. He's done a lot of work with homeless people over the years, and he has an idea sort of for emergency shelter, and I'll just let him take over here. It's easier for me.
Good morning. I'm Dana Linscott, one of the co-founders of the River Falls Alliance for the Homeless, which is essentially an organization of volunteers that often just supply volunteers to other organizations that help the homeless. We have two principles. One is we don't take any money away from any existing organization that's doing this. And the other is we try and catch people that fall through the existing safety net. And I was really, I thought I was prepared, but I was really amazed at all the people. I'm still finding new groups of people that completely fall through the safety net. Maureen asked me to first speak about how people become homeless. And there's a lot of reasons, but it generally boils down to this. They're right on the edge and one thing goes wrong. It can be anything. Car breaking down, losing your job, getting your hours cut, missing SNAP benefits. You always have to eat, as the folks from Hope Village said, and rent becomes the thing that you have to give up, and eventually you're living in a car, if you're lucky, and you're homeless at that point. You have no address, and it becomes much harder, and worst of all, you can't get a good night's sleep. And without a good night's sleep, the trauma of becoming homeless never really gets any better. You can't make good decisions, you don't know where to find help, and it just, if you're lucky, it stabilizes at that. And if you're not, the downward spiral continues. The economics of the last year, the cutting of Section 8 benefits and SNAP benefits are just going to accelerate it further. We're seeing a little movement in the local rental because there simply aren't enough people that can afford the lowest cost rentals, and so it's actually changing the market slightly because renting to somebody for $50 less or $30 less is better for business than being empty. The other thing that I've been asked to speak about is about tiny homes. And looking at Thoreau's cabin, yes, I'm going to try and say Thoreau too, but I'm not going to. Reminds me of my first tiny home. When I got out of college, I could afford some land, but I did the mathematics, and there was no way in that economic area that I was ever going to be able to actually own a home. And so I decided, well, I'll build one. And it would have been helpful if I would have had some skills accumulated to do that, but I built essentially something about the size of Thoreau's, a little bit larger. There, see, I can't do it. And made it through the winter, and just as I earned money, I built onto it more. But it was just essentially, it was pretty much a tiny home the whole time. It was just more efficient as time went by. I was partially raised by grandparents that had gone through the Depression, through the Great Depression. And they instilled in me that it's really important to learn how to stretch money more than make money. And I became maybe better at it than they anticipated. So when it comes to building tiny homes, I think it's possible to build them for a little over half of what it's anticipated of building them from scratch. There's two types of tiny homes. There's cottages, which have a foundation, and then there's tiny homes that they're officially and legally vehicles because they're on wheels. And therefore they're not nearly as subject to the costs of complying to zoning or as a cottage type tiny home is. So that's what we're talking about with the local Wellspring Village. Eventually, hopefully, they'll be able to move on and build more transitional and permanent housing, and I'd love to talk to you about that some other time, but that's not today's subject. That would be the solution to combating homelessness in River Falls. There are two types of tiny homes that I believe are proposed. One is essentially a micro shelter. It's a secure place that can be heated, that is the size of a pop-up camper without the wings on it, just the central hard body. And that's what they're made of. They're essentially lifted up and hard insulated walls are put in and a small heater, and they can be made extremely efficient, extremely cheaply. And they are what would be considered an emergency shelter. Yes? Ah, okay. There we go. This is the type of material that is simplest to build because it's essentially foam sandwiched between two layers of plywood with modern construction adhesive and then weighed down. And essentially they're light enough and simple enough to build that they don't need studs, and they can just be essentially screwed and glued together to build a tiny home. So they can all be prefabricated. They're custom because of the sizes. But the emergency shelters will be, well, they can be built on a frame and the remnants of a pop-up camper, which cost about $200 for the running gear and frame and what's left of the camper after mice get done chewing the canvas, which inevitably happens. There's a huge amount of those available for about 1/3 of the cost of what the running gear and frame would cost to have, and you've got a good, easy basis to build things on. Thank you. Like this. This is essentially a stripped camper without the roof, and these are the prefabricated panels that are made of foam and plywood. One of the reasons that building out of foam and plywood is required is because campers are made extremely light and the running gear isn't made for a lot of weight. So you have to really be aware of how much weight you're adding to it before you overcome the limits of the maximum weight on the trailer frames. Let me see if I've got another one. And that's what it would look like with the existing roof that comes on a pop-up camper after it's been insulated. This could be heated with about 800 watts of electrical power. Standard dairy room heater is around 1,500 watts. So two of these could be heated with less than, well, about what a standard electric heater turns out. You can use the doors that exist on them by insulating them kind of like a panel, and then you can cut windows in them anywhere you want because there's no wiring, there's no studs, there's nothing. You simply cut the hole and foam in the windows wherever you want them. It's very simple production, and it's something that volunteers could be easily used for without a lot of training. Oh, too early. And the same building techniques can be used for the larger 20 by 8 tiny homes, essentially for the shell, and then you have all the remaining weight capacity to build the interior rooms and put in beds and things like that. But any of you who have campers will notice that everything is made as light as possible, kind of like airplanes, because the more weight, the heavier the running gear has to be. Again, the cost can be about halved by using this type of construction and by looking for older trailers that, again, the mice have had their way and they should just be stripped down to the frame anyway. Well, those can be purchased for under $300 or $400, and to build that running gear and frame would run $1,800 to $2,000 right there. So your donations, or anybody's donations, can go a lot further, which I think as a donor I've always felt really good when more was accomplished with my dollars than I expected when I gave them. I think we're to questions now. Yes?
There should be some infrastructure related to this, like we're in tornado areas, and so what do these people do when the winds come up? And what do we do about showers and that sort of thing?
That's a great question, and that's where the Ministerium's Wellspring Village and visit to Hope Village comes into play. I've prepared and researched the construction, but what it needs is a central building. What's been done on the West Coast with things like this is churches host one or two or three or four in their parking lots, and in order to not wear out their welcome with their neighbors or burn out their volunteers, they move them to another host church every 3 weeks or so. This is kind of something that's worked, generally speaking, not only in the West Coast, but Red Wing has an unhoused support effort where the churches each take a week, I think, and it works really well. So it's those churches that will provide the shelter for bad weather, and if they don't have facilities, shower facilities, bathroom facilities, each one of those units at Hope Village has a little camping toilet that can be brought in and actually poured into the toilet and rinsed out in the central building. They also have a tiny home-like building where they hooked into the city sewer and the city water, and they have I think it's like a 24-foot trailer, they have a bathroom, 2 showers, and some laundry facilities. And so that's something that could also be brought from along with each host church's needs. Yes. Oh, you have the microphone. Yes.
I'll just follow up on that question. So, and this is for Maureen too. The Wellspring Village, as I understand it, it's going to be at Luther Memorial, right? The first on wheels cabin.
And is that, calling it Wellspring Village is sort of aspirational?
Yeah.
And Luther Memorial is going to host it. And
You need to get at the microphone, I think, for the people at home.
I said that calling it Wellspring Village right now is aspirational because we're just looking at building one at present and hosting, and Luther Memorial hosting it. And at one point they were talking about getting a grant so that they could make their access to their bathrooms available with a fob that the people living in the tiny home would have, but they wouldn't be able to get into the rest of the church. And I don't know the status of that right now, but go ahead.
So, we've sort of pushed that idea around for this place here. The main obstacle is the shower facility and perhaps the laundry. You can always go to public laundry, but the shower facility is, I think, the roadblock for this.
Well, our neighbor's place has that available along with laundry. So although eventually they'd become overburdened, initially they could provide both of those.
Oh, that's great to hear. So you haven't coordinated a mixture of the low-cost emergency shelters with the more higher cost. You haven't coordinated that at all.
I don't know if that's what I'm proposing. I'm
Okay.
not part of. I'm at best an unofficial advisor and donor.
I'm planning to bring it up at with the ministerium, his idea.
Have you reached out to the county health department to coordinate with them or see what kind of resources that they might have? And I think they would be interested in knowing about this effort too.
I have, and even more interestingly, the probation and parole offices have reached out to me in the mistaken belief that I could help provide shelter for the folks whom they're required to provide some shelter for, and have been unable to. So there have been folks on parole and probation that were seeking shelter in porta potties last winter, just to get out of the wind, essentially. And when we found actual shelter for them, to their credit, the probation department in Ellsworth jumped on it. It's like, oh, we have a solution. And we do in a way, because the state has funding, quite a bit of funding, for providing housing for folks recently released from prison who are unable to support themselves initially. And so if this were available, and it would not be probably part of one of the churches, because being recently released from prison is not, doesn't put you high on the list, but there could be a second place that would allow that. The county's very interested always in stretching the dollars that seem to be shrinking while the need grows. And so, yeah, in fact, they've reached out to us, and I'm sure they've reached out to our neighbor's place and and finally got to us because everybody said we don't have anything more. And unfortunately, I think we were probably the bottom they were scraping when they hit the alliance.
So I had a couple of thoughts. I lived in Alaska for a summer, for 6 weeks or so, with a couple of friends, and we had jobs, we worked, but we showered and did our laundry in a public laundromat. There are, I think, a fair number of places, including like truck stops, which we don't have one around here, but those were coin-op, or you could pay with a token or something to take a nice hot shower. The other thought I had is I used to have a little camper, and I wondered if you guys had thought about maybe requesting donations of, some of the older scamps that are already sort of constructed. They're ready to go. They have beds and sometimes cooking facility, sometimes a small bathroom.
Absolutely. For a couple of $1,000s, I could fill up a parking lot of unconverted campers that just need some work done on them, and that would make me very unpopular. So getting the pipeline flowing is kind of the next step, and that's what's happening right now. We have a shop that the Wellspring Village head of building committee and some men are going out there very soon to clear spaces, and it's huge. We could work on 3 or 4 in that place.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and thanks, Maureen. My question is, when you went to Chippewa, Maureen, and when you guys learned about what's going on in Chippewa, who's owning this there? It seems to me in River Falls, we're fortunate to have our neighbor's place that resulted from the churches leaning in and saying, we're going to do something about this, and they formed our neighbor's place, and that's gotten traction in the community. But when you look at homelessness, it seems like everyone owns a piece of it, but nobody's really putting their arms around it and owning it. So the school district might say, yeah, well, we have children in our school who don't have a place to call home at night, but is that our problem to fix? Now, the city, we're running the city. Is the fact that some people have no house to live in, we're doing the best we can to build housing, is it our problem? And the county, of course, a long time ago, there were the county farms. If you didn't have a home, you went to the farm. What is the county saying, what's our problem? So I'm wondering, my question is, were there any learnings from Chippewa that we could implement here about establishing collective ownership for this challenge?
Yes. Everybody benefited from the city to the county because the problem, nobody's ever caught up to the problem, and it's unlikely that anybody ever will. That would be lovely, but hasn't happened. And so everybody that became involved became overwhelmed and had to turn people away because they just didn't have the resources. And I believe everybody, that's the same situation probably everywhere that I know of. I've researched out on the East and West Coast. I haven't looked to the South very much, but everybody just gets overwhelmed, and whoever steps out is the next group that gets overwhelmed. So what happened with Hope Village was they all coordinated, and they coordinated with the county, coordinated with the city, coordinated with local businesses, which were really the folks that could provide not only funding, but direction in how to don't pay retail, pay wholesale when you're doing this sort of thing. And all of the organizations that businessmen belonged to were then automatically and maybe unwillingly at first became involved. But it was basically once everybody decided to work together, that it wasn't somebody else's problem, that things turned. Did they explain much of that to you, Maureen?
Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't go on that field trip. There was something, but I know our group is trying to. They've got a board. They're putting together a board. They're looking for 501c3, as I said, and I'm sorry I can't be more. I don't know more than that because I haven't been to the last couple meetings. But I know the churches are really into it. They're trying to involve. You're going to have to involve the city because they need. If it's successful, we're going to need to have land and a place for it to grow. One thing I wanted to say that I learned as being on this group is kids. One of the populations that kind of breaks your heart is that kids aging out of foster care don't have a place to go. And that just does not seem right at all.
I had forgotten about that. That is a large section of the younger homeless population. They had no family, and at 18 they were on the streets, and no savings, no experience, no family to, act as a backstop. And that's really common. I've run into an awful lot of that.
I remember at Hope Village, the Habitat for Humanity was very involved.
Yes, Habitat for Humanity was very involved. And that was Habitat for Humanity. St. Croix County has shown interest once things are moving, not only in providing volunteers, but providing materials. And they've got quite a pipeline for that, too. So it's been mainly getting things moving along that has been the hard part. And that's what the ministerium is doing. And having anticipated this for about 2 years, I know to Maureen and probably everyone else, it seems like it's moving glacially. But the fact that it's started moving and it is actually gaining momentum means it is going to happen, and there will be that vacuum required for money and donors and volunteers in the near future, and I don't anticipate that will let up for a long time. It's the churches that have got it going, and that's something that's created a group to join rather than lead, and there's a lot more people and organizations that are willing to do that.
Thank you, Dana.
You're welcome. Thank you.